Brian Marshall of Broadpoint AmTech is not shy about his views on Apple. He says it's the greatest technology company on the planet, and he'd probably love it a whole lot more if they would follow his advice for increasing sales of the iPhone. Welcome. This is Taking Stock on Bloomberg. All right, Brian Marshall, tell us, what should Apple do to boost sales of the iPhone?
Sure, Pimm, thanks. I think Apple needs to move away from their exclusive arrangements across the planet. So, they've been doing that, obviously, since they launched the iPhone a little over 2 years ago. But the big point of my argument is in the U.S. Obviously, they're stuck with AT&T right now. Not stuck. They're doing well, obviously. But I think if they migrated to Verizon in the second half of next year, after that AT&T exclusive arrangement expires in June of 2010, we think that Apple could actually ship roughly 14 million incremental iPhones in 2011 with Verizon. So we see it as a match made in heaven.
All right, but Brian, I mean, then they would have to be saying goodbye to what, a $450 subsidy that they receive from AT&T. Are they going to be able to make it up on volume?
Yeah, Pimm, that's a good point. In fact, my model is pretty conservative, despite the fact I'm street high with my pro forma calendar year 2010 estimate of $1.75. I'm sorry, $11.75.
Better, thank you. You gave me a little bit of a heart stoppage there.
That's a big multiple. I assume that goes to $300 for everybody, all carriers, not only international but U.S. as well. So I think when they do that, they can still actually do very well because they'll make it up through volume, and so all that earnings will go to the bottom line.
Does it matter which network would carry the iPhone? Because in the past conversations, we've talked about how a very small group of Apple iPhone users is really responsible for something like 40% of all the data traffic on the AT&T network.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. So roughly 4% of the AT&T users of the iPhone consume about 40% of the overall network bandwidth. So that's a pretty big issue. I mean, obviously, whenever I travel to New York with my iPhone, I get drop calls all the time. Whenever I'm here in San Francisco, it drops all the time. So very frustrating experience, but I'm not going to move away because Apple has their hooks into me. I enjoy my user experience on the iPhone despite the poor network quality issues. So if Verizon is able to figure those issues out, and AT&T hopefully will over time as well, I think that's the opportunity. And so, the BlackBerry obviously is much more spectrally efficient when you're talking about consumption of bandwidth of the networks. And so, I think that we've got to figure those issues out before we can actually have a really good user experience on a network.
Brian, how important has the iPhone been to the postpaid mobile phone market, not the prepaid, the higher margin long-term plans that people have to sign up for, the postpaid market?
It's been hugely incremental, especially in the States. In fact, I call it the iPhone effect. 2 years ago, before AT&T had the iPhone, their postpaid net adds in comparison to their largest competitor, Verizon, were about half of what Verizon was adding on a quarterly basis. Fast forward 2 years with the iPhone represents, believe it or not, 90% of all of AT&T's postpaid net adds last quarter. And so for the last 2 quarters, AT&T's postpaid net adds were actually larger than Verizon. So AT&T's gaining share, 100% due to the iPhone. So it's a very big deal.
Brian, can AT&T sort of block the introduction of the iPhone into the Verizon network? I mean, what if they said, all right, we'll not only continue the $450 subsidy, we'll increase it?
That's a possibility. I mean, I think that they're going to try to do everything in their power to keep that exclusivity ongoing. I don't think Apple, it's in their best interest to do that. I don't think the U.S. government wants to see exclusive contracts as well. And so, although I do think AT&T is going to try to do everything humanly possible to keep that exclusivity, I just don't see it happening longer term, Pimm.
All right, you've got a $235 price target on the shares of Apple. Apple shares closing at $200 today. You say this is 20 times the pro forma 2010 earnings. You expect $11.75 in earnings from Apple. How important is the iPhone introduction in China to those estimates?
Yeah, it's pretty important, but it's not the end game. I mean, if you look next year, my iPhone assumption for the year, calendar year 2010, roughly 37 million units. And so, if you look at who's AT&T's partnered with in China, or I'm sorry, who Apple is partnered with in China right now, it's China Unicom. You know, their postpaid sub base is about 70 million units right now. So, you know, if you assume 2 or 3% incremental penetration of that base, you know, we're talking the upwards of a couple million units. So, you know, well less than 10% next year is going to come from China, in my opinion. You know, the real opportunity is longer term. As you mentioned before, China, their prepaid market is substantially larger than that of their postpaid market. So, if Apple were to do anything, you know, in that market, that would obviously China would be a huge opportunity for them going forward.
All right. Now, while we almost have focused exclusively on the iPhone, it's important to note that Apple has other business lines. Tell me what's going on in the computing business and what the launch of Windows 7s mean for Apple. Does it mean anything?
Sure. I don't think it means too much, actually. I did an analysis basically studying the 4 major OS operating system launches from Microsoft over the past 10 years. And ironically, the launch has actually almost acted as a delayed accelerant, if you will, to Mac sales. And so every time Microsoft launched a new operating system, Mac sales kind of took off a little bit afterwards. And so, you know, we're not too concerned about Win 7 and the impact on Mac. Mac continues to gain share idiosyncratically. I think everything that they're doing, you know, they just continue to do very well. You know, if you go to a Best Buy, you look at all the notebooks, you know, clearly, you know, the the MacBook lines, the MacBook Pros and MacBook Airs are the best designed out there. And so while they still represent less than 5% of the overall market, I think that they continue to gain massive share. For example, last quarter alone, September, both on a year-over-year and sequential basis, units grew 17%. And so that's a case in point of them just continuing to perform very well.
I'm speaking with Brian Marshall, analyst and expert in all things technology at Broadpoint AmTech.